Hello, and welcome again to the fourth session of Generations Alive Today. In previous sessions, I outlined three generations lasting 14 years, starting in 1927 and extending to 1970. This fourth generation has Pluto entering Libra, Neptune in Sagittarius, while Uranus spends 7 years in Libra, followed by 7 years in Scorpio. The 70s saw the birth and growth of a new religion, the New Age. The baby boomers had to make a choice. The streets were becoming deadly. The movement corrupted and the hippies were being painted as drug burnouts and spare change becoming their mantra. Many became the yuppies and embraced the fruits of money. Many went to India and brought back Eastern philosophy and religions. The New Age was born. They withdrew from the world scene to embrace higher consciousness. Their energy went into New Age philosophies of impersonal love. Enlightenment was now their quest. Neptune and Sagittarius asked the question, what is the illusion of higher consciousness? One of the tenets of embracing higher consciousness meant being positive. Many went overboard, leading to total refusal to entertain anything that wasn't positive. As such, they left the streets of negative protest to embrace higher consciousness. The controllers once again neutralized the uprising. The Vietnam War was winding down as few American lives were lost and many were coming home. The light of fire in its campaign against the power of darkness and communism was starting to smooth out as negotiation with China opened the door for the latter to become a world leader in capitalism. The face of the U.S. continued to crumble as President Nixon had to resign in disgrace. The U.S. continued to lie and cover up its illegal action in Southeast Asia when they were bombing Cambodia and disrupted that country, initiating a reign of terror. The U.S. finally negotiated a peace with honor and removed their troops, opening the door for a communist win. So a brushfire war that killed thousands on both sides and divided irreversibly the U.S. ended with the unification of a country that took them years to accomplish. They have been at peace ever since, proving that Eisenhower's domino theory was just another lie and at a terrible cost. Pluto in Libra and relating was the emphasis during the 70s. Transactional analysis was the psychology of that time. You were the sum of your relationships. I'm okay, you're okay was the mantra of the times. People were questioning traditional relationships and the institute of marriage declined. It was a great time to be single. Open marriages, couple swapping, bisexual all became the thing. It was a great time for therapy. The 70s was the women's generation where they escalated the war for equality. They were jumping out of the garbage can and not jumping back. They were learning the value of becoming a collective. The raindrop became the river. Male archetype of John Wayne was labeled male chauvinist and subject to ridicule. This all had led to a division on what is the male archetype. One side believed in the romance of the hero and his prize. The other is the liberated woman and her mate that is conscious enough to keep up. Once again, there was a strong division. The split created movies for machos and ones for the sensitives. The rise of the two-step was a favorite of one side, while the discotheques were the head and for the opposite. Rock and roll remained king. The Christians were outraged with the liberated woman and the effects it had on family values. The liberated woman claimed the right to her body. Anti-abortion became a big issue. The liberated woman welcomed people of all sexual preferences. The Christians saw it as a work of the devil. They retreated and started to build up people claiming Christian values into local political offices and members of the school board. This resulted in the split between the rural and the urban areas and marked the division between conservatives and liberals. Nixon and later Reagan, leading the Republican Party, became the conservative force. The Constitution of the U.S. has its executive branch split into two sections, the House and the Senate. The House has representatives and is proportional to the population, so a state like New York would have more representatives than, say, North Dakota. However, the Senate is different. Each state gets 2 senators, so a state like North Dakota has the same amount of power as New York, which ensures the continuing presence of the far-right conservatives in government, especially the Senate. Gridlock was guaranteed. Uranus in Libra marks the midpoint in its cycle. It started out in 1927 in Aries and worked through awakening the masculine. It did so by crumbling the masculine archetype and creating the sensitive male, capable of keeping up with the feminine. This starts the second half with the aim of awakening the feminine consciousness. The combination of Pluto and Uranus in Libra ensures the addiction of people in relationships. Venus is God. This addiction led to a loss of identity. They became lost in the Grail garden of timelessness. When people relate in the intimacy of timelessness, it's usually accompanied with their favorite drug. Overuse of Libra leads to laziness and drug burnout, and the need to stop the addiction through some form of Capricorn energy. Venus is the planet that rules Copper. It has a blue outer, Libra, and a red inner, Aries. The feminine was awakening to lessons on finding that point where attraction and blue becomes repel and red. The awakened feminine found it possible to bring cooperation into the workforce, and many became successful. However, the glass ceiling remained. They had to work twice as hard for half the pay. Many women gained consciousness of fair play and continued the traditional family and marriage. So after a decline, marriage and its rigid rules came back into vogue. This brought some of the liberated women consciousness into traditional marriage, which helped crumble the male archetype. However, the opposite was happening within the far right. The Uranus cycles measures a person's life. Recall, the Saturn cycle deals with the number 7. In 7, it was the first quarter square and crisis of growth. At 14, it was the subject meeting the object at teenage years. At 21, it marked a time when to embrace life's work. At 29 is the first Saturn return and becoming responsible for all of your actions. At 44 marks halfway around the second cycle and marks midlife. Meanwhile, Uranus moves 7 years in this cycle. So at around 40 years at midlife marks the mid-cycle. Moreover, the other 2 planets have aspects at that time, giving 4 planets raging havoc during the years called midlife. The depression babies was experiencing midlife. The Uranus opposition is the release of the side delegated to projection or hidden in the subconscious. For the archetypal male, there would be a release of feminine energy that would scare the hell out of John Wayne. To prove his manliness, he would divorce his wife and start chasing the young ones. In doing so, he is showing the world that he is still a man. To many, it can be extremely scary. For others, it can be a release of the worn-out male archetype and be allowed to show his feminine side. he is given permission to cry. To the women, the opposition brings out her masculinity. She throws the bum out and starts pursuing education so that she can bring out her solar power. In both cases, the emergence of their opposite energies can overcome the original persona and they become their opposites. The archetypal male becomes the helpless old man, while the woman grows a mustache and is given permission to be a grouch. The 1970s is the time of the switchover. So as the masculine is awakening with feminine energy, his sisters are awakening to their masculine. The two energies experience a flip-flop. For the depression babies, it marked their midlife and the turning on of their feminine. To those, it was exciting to tear off the worn-off masculine. To the rest, it was scary having to deal with the emerging feminine. For the flower child, they were 29 and the need to take on their life's work and responsibility. It was a battle between being responsible or escaping into Aquarius in the quest for freedom. Some were able to combine both and opened the way for new ventures in the line with the new consciousness. For some, it started a pathway to become homeless in the 90s, dreaming of the return of the good old days. For the Gothic generation, they were teenagers with strong desires for relationships. Their ego is measured by how popular they were. Many experienced the negative side of relationships early in their teen years. Their parents were the depression babies and wanted to be their friends. This generation rewarded them by becoming their opposite. Peace was met with war. During these years, peers were their gods, and their parents gave them free range to experience the addiction of relating for ego. People born between 1970 to 77 will have the sign of Libra containing both Pluto and Uranus, and will affect all the scripts depending on what house it finds itself in. The Yang portion of the Libra script has the trine to Aquarius, affording a mass that is favorable to the object given an attraction. By becoming invisible, it creates a favorable image and others are attracted to it. What it learned is the wisdom of Sagittarius from the attraction. Neptune in Sagittarius will create a positive illusion during this Yang portion of the script. They will attain the addiction of Libra and relating at a very young age. Their parents, the flower child, will encourage them in Libra qualities, especially if they are a single mom. Sometime during this year, they will feel a loss of identity and embrace their opposite, Aries and Mars. So the relationship between parent and child is war and peace. It requires strong-willed parents that can play both mother and father roles to keep their child in line. Saturn was in Cancer during this time and was the energy that converted the Libra to its opposite, Aries. The single mom, many with Uranus in Cancer, had to become the father and say no. The role of the nurturer was the key ingredient that catalyzed the conversion of Libra and peace to Aries and war. Saturn's position in Cancer at the midheaven guaranteed that there would be drama there. Neptune in Sagittarius is the dream of being with the gods. Many were spoon-fed with the New Age philosophy that being positive was sacred. Children during teenage years will act out the opposite of their parents so as to create a negative mirror for synthesis. This is how generations evolved. Many succeeded in a quantum jump to a new consciousness for both the parent and the child. Many didn't, resulting in an uneasy truce or complete separation. The synthesis was that there were moments to be positive or negative depending on the situation. There is wisdom gained when the shadow is observed in its totality. Stories dealing with death became a mainstream. The liberal coalition of feminine thinking directed towards freedom and tolerance suffered a blow when AIDS became a reality. It first struck the gay community and gave ammunition to the conservatives, concluding that this is what the abomination deserved. That feeling of triumph was short-lived when AIDS invaded the heterosexual. It ended, however, the concept of free sex. It became so scary that the 23rd Psalm became a mantra. Now I go into the valley of death. I will fear no evil. A lot of people demanded the AIDS test. This tainted the free single life. Traditional marriage came back into style. The New Age was becoming a religion of airy fairies, being sweet and nice and everything being positive. Recall, the subtle game in the higher consciousness game is, I didn't get hooked in emotions. I must be higher consciousness than you. Their favorite argument if the practitioner's magic didn't work was, oh, I'm sorry, your consciousness wasn't high enough for it to work. Many disillusioned souls returned to Christianity where the 700 Club, the TV evangelists, and the Jesus freaks were becoming a hit. There must be a connection between Uranus and Scorpio and AIDS. The sexual revolution experience went to the extremes, leading to serious addictions. The AIDS virus is connected with the vibration of Uranus and the desire to break down holism to create new life. If unchecked, it can crumble a whole into small bits. Uranus deals with crumbling societies. The discovery of Uranus ushered in the French Revolution with a destructive effect of crumbling societies until there was nothing left. Once the forces of Uranus start, it's hard to control, leading to complete destruction. This is why so many people are afraid of revolution. Soviet Russia was starting to show its weaknesses in its Vietnam, Afghanistan. The U.S. was instigating the uprising, creating what later became the Taliban and later still ISIS. The U.S. made the switch to serious conservatism with Reagan at the helm. He was described as the reckless cowboy and was the archetype of reclaiming the American dream. In his quest to rid the world of the evil empire, he put the U.S. into a war economy, guaranteed that there would be constant war so as not to have financial collapse. The U.S. became the largest producers of weapons of mass destruction, and most of this money went into defense. The conservatives were in their glory. The U.S. was again kicking ass. They were becoming more aggressive. They made sure that any communist threat in the Western Empire was eliminated. They achieved this by continuing the blockade of Cuba. Anti-communist governments get into control of all the governments. Most of them were psychopaths. Meanwhile, drug routes were created so that the CIA could control the manufacturing, shipping, and distributing of drugs to the starving U.S., cocaine being a favorite. This gave the secret government huge revenues along with corrupting the minorities, especially in the ghettos. So the war on drugs gave them power, money, and destroyed enemies of the rich white people in control. The conservative government instituted the concept of trickle-down economy. This opened all kinds of legal trips to ensure that the rich got richer. The gap between rich and poor was steadily increasing. The evils of capitalism was showing, but nobody cared as long as they were getting some of it. The second Saturn-Pluto conjunction occurred in 1982 and again made an irreversible change in consciousness. The beast came out of the bottomless pit, and it was greed. The division between how much money do you have. Inflation saw the erosion of wealth as the middle class was slipping into poverty. TV shows were dedicated to the rich. Recall, the first conjunction occurred in the 40s where the world was split into two, communism on the left and the war with capitalism on the right. The second brought in the end of communism and the start of the new one, the one against the many. While the U.S. was spending all its money on war, other countries were spending it on their infrastructure, and it wasn't long before Japan was a challenger in the war on making money. The U.S. was losing its manufacturing capabilities to other cheaper workforce, resulting in another class of Americans joining the ranks of the poor. The U.S. became Disneyland for the high rollers. It didn't matter who or where you came from. If you got the bucks, you can play. Otherwise, get a job at Walmart. The American dream was becoming a nightmare for the increasing poor. More and more people had to work two jobs to pay expenses, becoming disillusioned what was happening. They were looking for people to blame. All as the U.S. was winning the Cold War, they were losing the economic war to developing countries in Europe and especially in Asia. They were getting sloppy in hiding their covert activities, such that it became an ongoing scandal, but nobody cared as long as they were making money. Children born during these times would have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Libra in one of their houses, and these activities would have a strong influence on all the scripts. They became a disillusion with religions and philosophies spouted by their parents and guardians. These children were Perseus in the struggle against Medusa, using the mirror of Libra to shine back on them. They were on a campaign to strike down anything fitting the profile of medicine, sprouting philosophies and religions with facts. A campaign was enforced to dumb down the children. Shortly after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, Pluto went into Scorpio. Uranus went into Sagittarius and later Capricorn, while Neptune slipped into Capricorn and marked the next generation. I call Generation Y, the original name. For some strange reason, they were later called the millennials, which I find confusing since they were not born in the turn of the century. This generation marks the years from 1984 to 1998 and will be the subject for the next session. Until then, be happy.